With the Department of Homeland Security shutdown entering its 37th day and TSA workers quitting in droves, the Senate spent its rare Sunday session debating whether voting should be as easy or as hard as getting into a local recreation center.
That wasn't just a colorful metaphor, by the way. If you look at the transcript from yesterday, Sunday, March 22nd, Senator Mike Lee, RUT, was explicitly drawing that comparison, questioning why a gym pass sometimes requires more verification than a federal ballot.
It was a surreal Sunday on the floor. While most of the country was tuned out, the record shows a chamber wrestling with two massive colliding crises: the total paralysis of DHS and this push to overhaul federal election rules through the SAVE Act.
And the tension is palpable in the text. You have members who haven't been home in weeks debating ID requirements, while the very agencies meant to secure the country are running on fumes and IOUs. It's not just a policy fight anymore. It's a logistics nightmare.
We have a bit of a longer runway today to look at how these two issues became inextricably linked, how a bill about voting became the linchpin for funding the border. We'll also look at a few late-night amendments that suggest some members are looking for an exit ramp, even if the leadership isn't there yet.
It's the kind of procedural chess match where everyone claims they're being held hostage, but no one wants to be the one to pay the ransom. And the ransom note is currently 300 pages of election law.
Let's start with the standoff that's currently keeping the lights off at DHS and the rhetoric that took over the floor during that Sunday session. This is the 37-day hostage crisis. The record from yesterday, Sunday, March 22nd, shows a Senate that is essentially living in the Capitol building at this point. We are now 37 days into the partial shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, and the rhetoric on the floor has shifted from standard policy disagreements to something much more visceral. The word hostage appeared in the transcript more than a dozen times yesterday, used as a weapon by both sides of the aisle.
It's a term that usually signals a complete breakdown in negotiations. And if you look at the operational data being cited on the floor, the breakdown is happening in real time at the ticket counters. We're seeing reports that more than 360 TSA officers have resigned since this started on February 14th. That isn't just a staffing fluctuation, it's a specialized workforce evaporated during the spring travel peak.
Exactly. Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, spent a significant portion of his time yesterday detailing what that looks like for the average traveler. He read a story from the Record about a woman named Ambria Britt at Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. She has multiple sclerosis and typically relies on the accessibility lines. Because of the staffing shortages, she ended up having to pay a stranger to push her wheelchair through a line that had spilled out of the security zone and into the airport atrium.
And that's the human cost that members are starting to use to bridge the gap between policy and reality. Senator Scott's argument was that while senators are drawing their $174,000 salaries, TSA agents making $50,000 are missing their second full paycheck this week. He actually mentioned that he's donating his salary, but his broader point was about the No Budget, No Pay Act. The idea that if the workers don't get paid, the lawmakers shouldn't either.
Which is a perennial favorite for floor speeches during shutdowns, but it takes on a different weight when wait times in Houston and Atlanta are exceeding 3 hours. However, the Democratic side of the aisle sees a very different hostage situation. Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader from New York, argued that the GOP is holding these paychecks over the heads of the American public to force a rollback of ICE reforms that were sparked by the Alex Preddy killing back in January.
This is where the mask debate comes in, which sounds like a relic of 2020, but is actually about tactical gear in 2026. The transcript shows a heated exchange over whether ICE agents should be allowed to wear masks during enforcement. Democrats want them unmasked and identifiable with visible badge numbers at all times. They're also demanding judicial warrants for home entries, essentially treating ICE more like local police and less like a paramilitary force.
Senator Scott pushed back on that unmasking requirement quite hard. He cited an 8,000% increase in death threats against ICE officers and their families. He argued that forcing these agents to show their faces and names during high-tension arrests is effectively doxing them to radical activists. In his view, the mask isn't about hiding from accountability. It's about physical safety for the agents' families.
It's a fascinating divide on what accountability looks like. To Schumer and the Democrats, a masked agent without a warrant is a violation of civil liberties. To Scott and the Republicans, an unmasked agent is a target. But while they argue over the gear, the actual functionality of the airports is about to face a new variable. There was a lot of talk yesterday about a plan for Monday. That's today for our listeners.
Right. The administration announced they would begin deploying ICE agents to airports starting Monday, March 24th, to fill the gaps left by the TSA exodus. Senator Schumer was scathing about this in the Sunday session. He characterized it as an impulsive action and said, ICE agents who are untrained and have caused problems everywhere they have gone, lurking at our airports, that is asking for trouble.
Schumer's concern, according to the record, is that these agents aren't trained in TSA screening protocols. They're being sent there to guard exits or handle perimeter security to free up the remaining TSA staff. But Schumer argues it will only increase the knot-in-the-stomach travelers feel. He also used a pretty vivid analogy regarding the broader administration strategy, saying Donald Trump's military strategy is like watching a snake eat its own tail.
That quote was specifically about the war in Iran, but he tied it back to DHS, suggesting the administration is creating crises, like the shutdown, and then trying to solve them with unhinged deployments. But then you have the Republican counter-argument, which shifts the focus toward the Save America Act. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, linked the DHS funding lapse directly to election integrity.
This is a connection the audience needs to watch closely. Lee spent a long time explaining the SAVE database within DHS. It's an existing system that helps states verify citizenship for benefit eligibility. Lee's argument is that the shutdown is actually preventing the scrubbing of voter rolls. He claimed that blue states are defiantly refusing to share their voter data with DHS to check for non-citizens.
Lee was very specific about the mechanics. He argued that because some jurisdictions allow non-citizens to vote in local elections, they have created voter registration files that could easily bleed into federal elections. He stated, "We know for a fact that this number nationwide is at least in the thousands. How many more are there from the blue states?" He's essentially framing the DHS shutdown as a defensive move by Democrats to protect those voter rolls.
It's a high-stakes pivot. He's taking a budget fight about ICE masks and turning it into a meta-law debate about who gets to make the laws. He used a legal analogy his father used to use about appellate arguments, that you have to prepare for every case as if it's the one that makes the difference, even if most don't. He's applying that to voter rolls. Even if it's only a few thousand votes, that could be the margin in a Senate race.
What's interesting is how he defended the Save America Act against the disenfranchisement claims. He pointed to page 22, line 12 of the bill, which allows for citizenship verification via a simple affidavit. He argued this is actually more flexible than the I-9 form you fill out for a job, which requires a passport or a birth certificate. It's a detail that often gets lost in the voter suppression versus election integrity shouting matches.
While Senator Lee was focusing on the data, Senator Dan Sullivan, Republican of Alaska, was focused on the exit ramp. He spent his time pushing for the confirmation of our colleague, Senator Markwayne Mullin, to take over as DHS Secretary. Sullivan's take was that Mullin is the indispensable convener who can actually sit in a room with both parties and find the middle ground on the ICE reforms.
Sullivan's speech was actually quite personal. He talked about how he's been lobbying his Democratic friends in private. According to Sullivan, many of them say, "Dan, I know I should be a yes on this, but..." And then they cite the political pressure from their home states or potential future runs for governor. Sullivan's quote was, "I have heard too many buts from my Senate Democrat colleagues. You know he is a qualified individual."
It's a classic Senate move. using a popular colleague as the ransom to end a hostage crisis. If Mullin is confirmed with a big bipartisan vote, it gives everyone a win and a fresh face to negotiate with. But Schumer's side isn't ready to let go of the ICE demands just because a friend is taking the helm. They want those body cameras and warrants written into the law before the money flows.
The Republican leadership did offer a clean continuing resolution, a CR, that would fund the department at Biden-era levels, just to get the paychecks moving. The majority whip noted on the floor that Democrats have voted for these exact funding levels multiple times in the past. He called the current situation the second Schumer shutdown, and argued that by voting against the CR, Democrats are essentially reversing their own previous positions.
It's a procedural maze. If you vote for the CR, you lose your leverage to get the ICE reforms. If you vote against it, you're the reason the TSA agent in Atlanta can't pay her mortgage. Both sides are trying to frame the other as the one holding the pen while the clock ticks. And let's not forget the 4,000 people tied to the terror watch list that the whip mentioned. That's a number designed to move the needle on national security grounds.
That number is from the start of fiscal year 2026. The argument being made is that while we're debating whether an ICE agent can wear a mask, the Border Patrol is encountering thousands of high-risk individuals. It's an attempt to pull the conversation away from the Alex Putty incident and toward a broader global terror risk, especially with the ongoing conflict in Iran.
And that ties back to Schumer's demand for the cabinet secretaries, Rubio and Hegseth, to testify. He wants them to explain the goal in the Middle East and how it's affecting inflation and gas prices here. It's all connected. The war in Iran is driving up gas prices, which makes the missed paychecks for DHS workers even more painful, which increases the pressure on the Senate to find a deal.
We also saw a bit of a subtle nod to the fact that we have more time to unpack this today, because the procedural movements on Sunday were so dense. Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester, Democrat of Delaware, eventually suggested the absence of a quorum to slow things down. That's often a sign that behind-the-scenes negotiations are reaching a fever pitch or have stalled out completely.
It's the cooling-off period. While the clerk calls the roll slowly, the leadership is usually in the cloakroom trying to see if that updated offer from the White House, the one that reportedly includes some movement on body cameras, is enough to get a few Democrats to cross over for the Mullin vote.
The record shows that Republicans are already making concessions on sensitive locations. They've offered to limit ICE actions at hospitals, schools, and churches. That used to be a major sticking point. Now that it's on the table, the question is whether the mask issue is the final hill both sides are willing to die on.
It's a bizarre visual, isn't it? A multi-billion-dollar department, the safety of the national airspace, and the paychecks of 260,000 people, all potentially hinging on a piece of tactical fabric. But as Senator Scott pointed out, it's not just fabric to the families of those agents. It's their anonymity in a very polarized environment.
And as we move into Monday, we'll see if the ICE deployment at airports actually happens. If those agents show up at JFK or Hartsfield-Jackson tomorrow morning, the temperature on the Senate floor is going to go from a simmer to a boil. Schumer has already signaled that he views it as a provocation, not a solution.
Wait, did you see the note in the record about the 300 pages election law being the ransom note? That was the phrase used during the Sunday debate. It reminds us that this isn't just about DHS. It's about the SAVE Act being tethered to the funding. If you want the TSA paid, you have to agree to the new federal voter registration rules.
That is the ultimate leverage. Republicans feel they have a winning issue with election integrity, and Democrats feel they have a winning issue with civil rights and ICE oversight. The hostage in this scenario isn't just the federal worker. It's the legislative process itself. No one wants to be the first to blink because they think the public is on their side.
But the public is the one standing in the 3-hour line. Senator Sullivan said it best when he mentioned that everyone knows Mullin is the right guy, but they can't get past the buts. In the Senate, a but is often just a polite way of saying, my base won't let me.
We'll be watching the vote tally on the Mullin nomination very closely. It's the first real indicator of whether the momentum Sullivan talked about is real or just wishful thinking. If he clears the 60-vote hurdle with a significant number of Democrats, the shutdown could be over by the end of the week. If not, we might be looking at day 40, day 50.
And by then, the TSA might not have enough people left to run the scanners, regardless of who is guarding the exits. It's an operational race against a legislative crawl.
The focus on the floor eventually shifted from the physical security of the border to the administrative security of the ballot box. This brings us to the next layer of this standoff, the procedural maneuvers that have turned the SAVE Act into a legislative shell game.
Actually, the transcript from yesterday, Sunday, shows one last bit of legislative whiplash that we can't ignore before we go.
It really highlights how the Senate can operate on two completely different tracks at the exact same time.
Exactly. After hours of bitter debate over whether to pay TSA agents or let the government stay closed, the Senate ended its Sunday by unanimously agreeing on one thing. It's finally time to give the sea turtles a federal grant program.
It's an incredible pivot. 1 minute, the chamber is paralyzed by high-stakes shutdown politics, and the next, there is total 100-0 agreement on the Sea Turtle Rescue and Rehabilitation Act. It seems supporting our shelled friends is the ultimate bipartisan safe harbor.
It's a reminder that even when the biggest gears are stuck, the smaller ones can still turn. If they can't agree on the federal budget, at least they can agree on the flippers. It's a rare moment of total harmony in an otherwise very divided record.
That's Floor Notes Extended for today.
Thanks for spending part of your Monday with us. We'll talk to you again the next time the gavel drops.